Marcus spent 23 years becoming one of the world's top radiologists, earning $450,000 annually. Last month, an AI analyzed 10,000 scans in the time Marcus reviewed one. His 2 decades of expertise became obsolete in a single software update. Imagine dedicating 20 years to mastering a skill: medical diagnosis, legal analysis, financial strategy, software engineering. You've become an expert, respected in your field, your professional identity deeply tied to what you know and what you can do. Then you discover that an AI system can perform your job more accurately, faster, and for a fraction of your salary. This isn't about factory automation or retail job displacement. We're witnessing the systematic devaluation of expertise itself, the elimination of careers that required decades of education, training, and experience. The psychological impact extends far beyond financial loss into questions of personal identity, life purpose, and human value in an age of artificial capability. Professionals who spent their entire adult lives building expertise are discovering that their knowledge has become a commodity that artificial intelligence can replicate instantly. The crisis isn't just economic, it's existential. When your career defines who you are, what happens when that career becomes meaningless? Today we're examining the psychological devastation of professional obsolescence, why high-skill workers face greater identity crisis than those in simpler roles, and what happens to human self-worth when expertise itself becomes worthless in an AI-dominated economy. Before we begin, we're analyzing documented employment trends and AI capabilities while exploring speculative scenarios about professional identity and career displacement. This content examines psychological impacts of technological change for educational purposes, not to create anxiety about job security or discourage professional development. For concerns about career planning or identity-related stress, consult qualified professionals who understand both labor economics and mental health. High-skill professionals face a unique psychological vulnerability. Their entire identity is often constructed around specialized expertise that required years of sacrifice to develop. Unlike workers in simpler roles who maintain separation between job and self-concept, doctors, lawyers, and engineers typically define themselves through their professional capabilities. Medical residents endure 80-hour work weeks and accumulate hundreds of thousands in student debt to become physicians. Their suffering is psychologically justified by the belief that medical expertise has permanent value. What if AI diagnostic systems eliminate that value proposition, rendering their sacrifice meaningless rather than transforming it into career security? If this analysis of how AI threatens professional identity and expertise value is revealing psychological dimensions you hadn't considered, hit that like button. It helps YouTube understand that content examining the intersection of technology and human self-worth deserves wider reach. And if you're curious about how artificial intelligence is reshaping professional identity and career meaning, subscribe to Future Paradox. We're investigating how emerging technologies challenge our understanding of expertise, value, and human purpose. Legal associates spend 7 years in education and early career training to develop analytical skills that law firms bill at $300–500 per hour. AI legal research systems now perform the same analysis in minutes for negligible cost. The psychological crisis isn't just about income loss, but about discovering that years of intellectual development have become economically worthless. What if the professionals most vulnerable to AI displacement are precisely those who invested the most in their careers? The cognitive and emotional sunk costs make it psychologically devastating to accept that expertise has become obsolete, creating denial and resistance that prevents adaptation to new economic realities. Software engineers who spent decades mastering programming languages discover that AI coding assistants produce better code than they can write. The identity crisis extends beyond unemployment fears into fundamental questions about intellectual capability and professional self-worth when artificial systems outperform human expertise. Financial analysts trained to identify investment patterns find their skills replicated by machine learning algorithms that process more data with greater accuracy. The psychological impact isn't comparable to factory workers losing jobs to automation. It's the elimination of cognitive superiority that justified years of difficult training and sacrifice. Professional identity provides more than income. It offers social status, personal meaning, and psychological structure for understanding oneself in the world. When careers that required decades to build become obsolete within months, the resulting identity crisis can be more psychologically destructive than financial hardship itself. Physicians who define themselves through medical expertise experience profound disorientation when AI diagnostic systems demonstrate superior capabilities. Their entire self-concept, social relationships, and life narrative were built around being healers with rare knowledge. What happens psychologically when that knowledge becomes common and easily replicated? What if the suicide rates and depression among displaced professionals reflect not just economic anxiety, but genuine existential crisis about human worth and purpose? When your expertise defined your value, its obsolescence creates questions about whether you have any remaining significance in an AI-dominated economy. Professionals often sacrificed personal relationships, health, and life experiences to build careers they believed would provide permanent value. Discovering that those sacrifices were for expertise that became worthless creates unique forms of regret and psychological trauma that workers in simpler roles may not experience as intensely. The social status attached to high-skill professions makes their elimination particularly psychologically damaging. Being introduced as a doctor or lawyer provided identity affirmation that disappears when those roles become obsolete, leaving former professionals struggling to define themselves without their career achievements. What if attempts to retrain displaced professionals fundamentally misunderstand the psychological crisis? It's not merely about learning new skills, but about reconstructing entire identities that were built over decades around expertise that society suddenly deems worthless. The psychological devastation may be greatest for professionals in mid-career who invested 15-20 years building expertise but lacked time to develop entirely new capabilities before retirement. They're trapped between obsolete skills and insufficient years to rebuild, creating hopelessness that purely economic support cannot address. Society's default response to technological displacement, retraining programs, fundamentally misunderstands the psychological reality of professional identity destruction. Teaching a 45-year-old radiologist to code doesn't address the trauma of having their medical expertise rendered meaningless, nor does it restore the status and identity they lost. What if retraining programs exist primarily to make displaced workers feel responsible for their own obsolescence? The message becomes, you failed to adapt, rather than acknowledging that no amount of individual effort can compete with artificial intelligence advancing exponentially faster than human learning. Professionals who spent 20 years becoming experts discover that any new skills they develop may be obsolete before completing their training. The psychological impact of perpetual inadequacy, always behind AI capabilities regardless of effort, creates learned helplessness and chronic anxiety about professional relevance. The cognitive and psychological flexibility required to rebuild professional identity decreases with age, making retraining particularly traumatic for mid-career workers who define themselves through expertise for decades. They're being asked to psychologically become entirely different people while maintaining mortgage payments and family responsibilities. What if the emphasis on retraining serves primarily to delay society's confrontation with a fundamental question? What happens to human worth and purpose when expertise itself becomes obsolete? No retraining program addresses the existential implications of human cognitive inferiority to artificial systems. Displaced professionals often report that retraining programs feel like psychological punishment, being told their decades of expertise were worthless, while being expected to enthusiastically embrace starting over in fields that AI will likely dominate within years anyway. The psychological message embedded in retraining programs is deeply damaging. Your value as a human depends on your economic productivity. When AI eliminates the possibility of valuable economic contribution for most humans, what does that imply about human worth? High-skilled professionals derived significant psychological benefits from social status attached to their expertise. Being a doctor, lawyer, or engineer provided not just income, but identity affirmation through respect, deference, and recognition. AI displacement eliminates this status, often more psychologically devastating than financial loss itself. What if the psychological crisis facing displaced professionals reflects the collapse of meritocracy itself? They followed society's rules, worked hard, educated themselves, developed expertise, and discovered that none of it protects against artificial intelligence making their capabilities worthless overnight. Former professionals struggled to maintain relationships and social connections built around their career identities. Friends who valued their medical advice or legal expertise no longer need their input when AI provides better answers. The social isolation compounds the identity crisis. The psychological impact extends to family dynamics where professionals were primary earners and authority figures based on their expertise. Losing career status often destabilizes family relationships built around professional identity, creating psychological trauma that affects entire household systems. What if displaced professionals experience grief comparable to losing a loved one? Their career wasn't just employment, it was their purpose, identity, and life's meaning. Its elimination creates mourning for a lost self that can't be recovered through new employment or financial support. The speed of professional obsolescence prevents psychological adjustment. Unlike retirement, which allows years of mental preparation, AI displacement happens suddenly, leaving professionals without time to gradually detach from career identities and develop alternative sources of meaning and self-worth. What if the psychological devastation of professional displacement creates a generation of people who experience permanent identity damage? Their formative years were spent building expertise that became worthless, leaving them psychologically unable to trust that any new identity construction won't similarly collapse. The displacement of high-skilled workers forces confrontation with uncomfortable questions about human value in an economy where artificial intelligence performs cognitive work better than humans. If expertise has no economic value, and economic value determines social worth, what basis remains for human significance? What if the psychological crisis facing displaced professionals represents humanity's broader confrontation with artificial cognitive superiority? When machines think better than humans across virtually all domains, the foundation for human self-worth, constructed around intellectual capability, collapses entirely. Professionals who built identities around being knowledge workers discover that knowledge itself has become worthless when AI possesses and processes it more effectively. The psychological implications extend beyond individual careers into fundamental questions about human purpose in an age of artificial intelligence. The emphasis on career and professional achievement in modern society created psychological vulnerability to the exact form of displacement we're now experiencing. When society teaches that human value derives from economic productivity and expertise, AI superiority eliminates the basis for human worth. What if future generations will need entirely different psychological frameworks for understanding human value? Ones not based on expertise, productivity, or cognitive capability, since artificial intelligence will surpass humans in all these dimensions. The professionals experiencing career displacement today are pioneers of a broader human crisis. the need to reconstruct self-worth and life meaning independent of economic contribution or specialized knowledge, since AI will eventually dominate all such domains. Displaced professionals face the psychological challenge of finding meaning and identity, independent of career achievement and expertise, a task particularly difficult in societies that taught them their value derived from professional success and specialized knowledge. What if the adaptation required isn't professional retraining, but psychological reconstruction of human worth, based on dimensions artificial intelligence cannot replicate? Consciousness, subjective experience, authentic relationships, creative expression for its own sake rather than economic value. Some former professionals report that losing career identity, while initially devastating, eventually created freedom to explore aspects of human experience they neglected during decades focused on expertise development. The psychological transition remains traumatic, but may offer unexpected opportunities for more authentic living. What if society's inability to provide displaced professionals with alternative sources of meaning and identity reflects our collective failure to develop value systems independent of economic productivity and expertise? AI displacement forces confrontation with questions about human purpose we've avoided by focusing on career achievement. The psychological support needed for displaced professionals extends far beyond job placement and financial assistance into existential counseling, identity reconstruction, and development of meaning frameworks not dependent on economic contribution or cognitive superiority. What if the professionals losing careers today are actually the fortunate ones? They experience displacement while still having peers who remember when human expertise mattered. Future generations may never experience the psychological satisfaction of being valued for knowledge and capability that AI hasn't already surpassed. The displacement of high-skilled professionals represents more than economic disruption. It's the systematic destruction of identities built over decades around expertise and achievement. When artificial intelligence makes human knowledge worthless, it eliminates the psychological foundation modern society provided for understanding. The crisis facing displaced doctors, lawyers, and engineers today previews humanity's broader confrontation with artificial cognitive superiority. As AI capabilities expand across all domains, every human will eventually face questions about worth and meaning in a world where machines perform cognitive work better than biological minds. What we're losing isn't just careers and income, but the entire psychological framework that allowed humans to understand themselves as valuable through expertise, achievement, and economic contribution. AI displacement forces reconstruction of human identity around dimensions that artificial intelligence cannot replicate or eliminate. The most disturbing aspect isn't the speed of professional obsolescence, but society's lack of alternative narratives about human worth. When expertise becomes worthless and economic productivity belongs to artificial systems, what remains as the basis for human significance and life meaning? What do you think? Can human identity survive the elimination of expertise as a source of worth? And here's what concerns me most. If you spent 20 years building specialized knowledge that AI rendered worthless overnight, could you psychologically reconstruct meaning and purpose, or would the identity devastation be permanent? If this analysis made you question how professional identity and human worth will survive AI displacement, subscribe for more examinations of how artificial intelligence challenges our understanding of expertise, value, and human purpose. And hit that like button if you believe these questions about career meaning and identity deserve deeper consideration. Until next time, remember, you are more than what you know or what you produce. What we explored today examines documented AI capabilities and employment trends while extending them into speculative scenarios about professional identity and psychological impact. This content encourages reflection on technology's effect on human purpose and self-worth, not anxiety about inevitable outcomes. For concerns about career planning, identity crisis, or technology-related stress, Consult qualified professionals who understand both labor economics and mental health.